to open the second collaboration of the Cyber Center Law and Cyber Center Law, the Center for Cyber and Law and Policy, and its collaboration with the Dispute Resolution Automation Lab, the lab I'm heading, studying dispute resolution and the sort of decreasing role of humans there. And I'm especially excited to have Noam Slonim as our guest, who I will go through some highlights of his super impressive resume, but I'm also proud to say he's a friend. So Noam will talk to us about the IBM Project Debater, the first, but not last, AI system that debated humans. And Noam is a distinguished engineer at the IBM Research AI lab. He received his doctorate from the Interdisciplinary Center for Neural Computation at Hebrew U, and held a postdoc position at Princeton at the Genomics Institute. He joined IBM Israel Research Lab in 2007, and in 2011, he proposed to develop Project Debater, and served as the principal investigator of this effort for more than 10 years. Since 2022, he's been working on utilizing large language models in practice to address large-scale text classification problems. Also super relevant, and maybe Noam will say a few things about that later if he wants. In terms of Project Debater, this was the first AI system to meaningfully debate a human opponent. The system that was developed in the previous decade as an IBM Grand Challenge was designed to build a coherent, convincing speeches on its own, as well as provide rebuttals to the opponent's main arguments. And in 2019, the project competed against Harish Natarajan, who holds the world record for the most debate victories, in an event held in San Francisco and was broadcast live. In this talk, he will tell us the story of the project and discuss its relation to the more recent language technologies such as ChatGPT. So while this project sort of preceded the more sort of sophisticated ChatGPT 3.5 and 4, Noam will reflect on those developments and their relationship, and hopefully at the end, when in the discussion phase, we can also think of some of the implications for the legal and dispute resolution field from which many of us here come. So without further ado, Noam, take it away.
Thank you, Orna. I think the first challenge is to try and share my screen. I'm not that used to Zoom, but I guess I should go to share screen and advanced sharing option, and
hopefully it was made available to you.
Yes, here's a code.
Okay, perfect. So share screen and then just pick the...
Oh, okay. So just a second. So let me know if you see the slides.
Perfect, thanks.
Okay, good. So thank you, Orna, for the kind introduction and also for the invitation. And I guess you see the title of my talk on this slide. And when I was discussing that with Orna a couple of weeks ago, I felt that this is a fairly good title. But while preparing this talk, I started to have some doubts. So I did what many of us are doing these days when we have a doubt. And I asked my new friend, ChatGPT, what it thinks about the title. And as you can see, it told me that the title is engaging, effectively highlights the pioneering nature of Project Debater while hinting about the future. It is clearly states the subject of the talk, making it immediately understandable to the audience, historically significant, future-oriented. It had some suggestions for refinement, which I, of course, ignored. But with this friendly support, as always, I should say, I decided to keep the title as is. But I think this little exercise also provides some hints about the nature of this talk. On the one hand, I will describe a technology that not so long ago was considered groundbreaking, but things have changed rapidly. And the fact that we can have this kind of a meaningful conversation with an AI system, which many of us perhaps accept as ordinary, is still remarkable, at least in my opinion. And I will try to somehow balance between these two axes, the story of developing Project Debater on the one hand, and its relation to more modern language technologies that are changing our lives and continue to evolve as we speak. And in fact, I was preparing this slide 2 days ago, and just yesterday, some videos were released to demonstrate the new GPT-4 variant, making this example already a bit archaic and out of date. So the pace is truly tremendous, and it is not easy to keep up. But anyhow, let's start with Project Debater. And you may think of that as a little bit of a history lesson that can provide some, hopefully some useful perspectives about what is happening today. And as you may know, in IBM Research, we have this history of grand challenges in artificial intelligence. In 1997, IBM introduced Deep Blue that was able to defeat Garry Kasparov in chess. In 2011, IBM introduced Watson that defeated the all-time winners of the TV trivia game Jeopardy. And just a few days after this event, an email was sent to all the thousands of researchers of IBM across the globe, asking us what should be the next big thing, the next grand challenge for IBM Research. And I was intrigued by that, so I offered my office mate to brainstorm together. And this is what we did. We sat in the office in Tel Aviv and we raised many different strange ideas that I would certainly not going to share with you today. But at some point towards the end of the hour, I suggested this notion of developing a machine that will be able to debate humans, and that this is how we will demonstrate the technology through a full live debate between this envisioned system and an expert human debater. And this sounded better than all the other options that we had up to that point, so we decided to submit that. The only guidance that we got were to submit the proposals in a single slide, so the relevant management will not be swamped with too many details, and we were able to carefully follow these guidelines, and we submitted a single slide. This was February 2011. And this started a long review process that lasted for a year, through which we built a much more detailed proposal. And eventually in February 2012, to our surprise, and to some extent also to our panic, this proposal was selected as the next grand challenge for IBM Research. And we started to work on that a few months later with a small team that gradually expanded. And after nearly 7 years of intensive work, dedicated only to this mission of developing a machine that will be able to debate humans, we finally demonstrated the system in an event held in San Francisco in February 2019. And it was a live debate between this system, now being called Project Debater, and one of the legendary debaters in the history of university debate competitions, Mr. Harish Natarajan. And it was surprisingly reminiscent to the vision that we drafted on that single slide back in the office in Tel Aviv quite a few years earlier. And this event drew massive media attention, more than 2 billion social media impressions, hundreds of articles in all the top media outlets, the New York Times, the Guardian, etc., millions of video views and so on. And for those interested, the full live debate is available through YouTube, and also available is a short and I think very nice documentary about the journey of our team over these years. And you can see the links on the slides, on the slide. The debate itself was around the topic of whether the government should subsidize preschool. Project Debater was on side government. The human debate champion was on the opposition. There were many considerations around how to select the debate topic for this public demonstration, but for the purpose of this talk, I will just emphasize that it was selected from a hidden list of unseen topics that were never included in the training data, the development data, or even the test data that we used while developing the system. So in a sense, Project Debater was developed to be able to debate many different topics as long as we limit ourselves to relatively simple topics that focus on a single concept. And this is, by the way, already quite different from some follow-up work that we did in our team, which I will discuss later on. Now, before going further to the architecture of the system and follow-up works, etc., I just want to share a first initial bit of perspective. As I mentioned, we proposed this project back in 2011 under the title, How Persuasive Can a Computer Be? And back then, and I believe also till 2019, when we demonstrated the system, this notion of a persuasive computerized system was considered very provocative. But recent years, and perhaps most prominently the last year and a half or so, showed us that this vision has now become a reality, and we are already talking on such concepts, almost in a casual manner. So for example, the box in the right is taken from the call for papers of a workshop held in ACL. ACL is one of the top natural language processing conferences. And this is during 2023, so this is actually early in 2023, and it focuses on recent advances in dialogue systems that have social influence. In other words, ideas that only a few years ago were considered nearly, I would say, science fiction, are now almost commoditized. Anyhow, going back to Project Debater, this is the high-level architecture of the system, and of course, I will not go through the details of each component, but let me try and share a high-level explanation. The system had two major sources of information. The first is a massive corpus, which and by the way, if you have questions or something is not clear and so on, feel free to make it as interactive as possible. So the system had two major sources of information. The first was a massive corpus, which we licensed from LexisNexis Academics, of around 400 million articles, or nearly 10 billion sentences, coming from many different newspapers and journals, scientific journals, and so on. And given a debate topic, the system was using various AI components to detect small pieces of text that satisfy three criteria. First, they should be relevant to the topic. Second, they should be not only relevant to the topic, but also argumentative in nature. So they should argue something about the topic. And finally, they should support our side of the debate. And as you can imagine, detecting such small pieces of text, out of the billions of options with nearly perfect precision was quite a formidable challenge. And once these pieces of text are detected, the system was using other AI components in order to arrange them together into a hopefully meaningful and compelling narrative. The second major source of information for the system was a unique collection of thousands of more principled arguments written and curated by debate experts during several years of work. And given the debate topic, the system was using various components to detect the most relevant principled arguments, so to use them during the debate in the right timing. So just to give you an example, what we mean by a principled argument, given a debate topic like we should ban gambling, or another debate topic like we should ban organ trade, in both cases, the opposition may argue that if you ban something, you are at the risk of the emergence of a black market that by itself has a lot of negative consequences. So the black market argument is a principled one in the sense that it can be used in the exact same phrasing in presumably very different debates. And one may naively assume that this is a relatively simple task. So if we ban something, we should anticipate the opposition to use the black market argument. But of course, it is more subtle than that. So for example, imagine a debate about banning internet cookies. We're probably not going to see people standing at street corners selling internet cookies to bypassers. Or imagine a debate about banning homework or banning breastfeeding in public. Again, I somehow don't see a black market emerging due to that. So all of this is to say that the system was required to have a more nuanced understanding of the human language in order to perform well in this particular task. And all this is just about building the opening speech. But in debate, of course, we also need to respond to the human opponent arguments, which is often the most important and most challenging part. And rebuttal starts with listening. And for that, we used Watson's speech recognition capabilities more or less out of the box in order to identify the words articulated by the opponent. But for rebuttal, of course, we need to go beyond the words and identify the gist, the main arguments in the opposition speeches. And to that, we use several different techniques that mostly rely on the same idea of trying to predict in advance which arguments the opposition might use, and then listen to determine whether indeed the opposition was making these arguments, and if so, try to respond accordingly. So this is the high-level description of how the system operated. And as you can imagine, to develop the technology underlying each of these boxes, we typically needed to have a team of researchers focusing just on that for a couple of years. And then also orchestrating everything together was obviously a challenge by itself. Now, debate starts with arguments, and there are many different theoretical models of arguments in the literature. And perhaps the classical one is the Toulmin model, which is quite subtle and involves 6 different components or 6 different parts. So this is coming from a field of philosophy, I believe, argumentation theory, and so on. But as emphasized on this slide, we restricted ourselves to a much simpler model. We were very, very pragmatic, mainly since early on we realized that we must keep things very simple so we will have a chance to achieve the extremely high precision that our system required. Bear in mind that we needed nearly perfect precision. Otherwise, you find yourself on stage in front of a lot of people, many of them journalists, talking nonsense, or even worse, you may be raising arguments that support the opposition, and so on. So to keep things simple, we decided that we will aim to mine from this LexisNexis corpus only 2 argumentative elements, which we refer to as claim and evidence, that can directly support or contest the debate topic. And although eventually our system worked over this huge LexisNexis corpus until 2016, we still didn't have access to this data. So we worked mainly over Wikipedia. And furthermore, in our papers, we usually refer to the Wikipedia data, since our contract with LexisNexis didn't allow us to share anything with the academic community. And with that in mind, the very first paper from our work on Project Debater was published in 2014. And it was basically a data paper that was based on a really tremendous effort we did with in-house annotators to collect this label data. And this resulted, in my opinion, with a very high quality data that received nice attention in the relevant communities since then. And shortly after this paper, we published our work on claim detection. This was a paper led by Ran Levy from our team. And later on in 2015, our work on evidence detection, led by Ruti Rinot from our team. And later on, our work on stance classification, understanding the stance of a claim or evidence, led by Roy Bar-Chaim from our team. Is there a question? Okay. Notice that these early papers were based on work that actually preceded the deep learning and the language models revolution in the natural language processing community. So I think these papers were important in terms of introducing the problems and suggesting preliminary solutions. But of course, with language models today, we can probably do much better. And in fact, we already demonstrated that when we published a follow-up work on corpus-wide evidence detection, and this was a paper led by Liat and Dor from our team, published in AAAI in 2020, where we used one of the early language model techniques called BERT to obtain very high precision results in this challenging task. And in this context, I think it is interesting to see our precision results over the years. So in this slide, you see the average precision we obtained in the top 50 claim candidates, where the average is taken over all the debate topics we considered for this internal evaluation. So in other words, for each debate topic, we take the top 50 sentences in the data that are predicted to be relevant claims for this topic. And we then claims or evidence, it doesn't matter in this regard. And we then manually examine how many of these are indeed confirmed by humans that they can serve as proper claims for this topic. And this defines the accuracy or the precision for this specific topic. And what you see in the chart is the average of this metric taken over many, I think it's nearly 100 debate topics. And as you can see, with feature engineering, which was the standard classical machine learning approach, by the end of 2015, we had an average precision of only 20%. And this is after nearly 3 years of work. So it was a critical point in the life of this project, and it took a lot of persuasion effort, human persuasion effort in this case, to keep the project alive. And also it required a lot of trust and patience from the IBM top management to continue to support this effort, which I believe you rarely see in such circumstances. And then in 2016, 3 things happened. We started to consider the much larger LexisNexis data instead of just Wikipedia data. So this is the power of the data. We started to work with a large number of crowd annotators using crowdsourcing platforms like Appen, in addition to our in-house annotators, but this enabled us to collect label data at a much greater scale. And this is a challenge by itself. How do you work with crowd annotators, people that you never meet in person? And thirdly, we started to move from the classical approach of building classifiers on top of feature engineering to deep neural nets that started to emerge at this time as a stronger alternative. And by the end of that year, we were able to improve the average precision from 20 to 60 in just 1 year. And by 2019, with BERT, we got extremely high precision. Although I should mention that BERT was not part of the system that we demonstrated in February 2019 at San Francisco, simply because it came out by the end of 2018, and this was too close to the actual event for us to try and integrate that. Anyhow, I mentioned just very few papers, but over the years we published more than 60 papers and released many unique data sets to the academic community to explore. And so if you're interested, I encourage you to further explore the link on this slide or contact me if needed. Now, going back to the high-level architecture of the system, it is perhaps worth noting the difference between this architecture and what we know about the architecture of more recent language systems, for example, this one. And this highlights another important difference, which is around transparency. So, while for GPT-4 and ChatGPT and perhaps some of the other commercial systems, I think it is fair to say that we do not really know the underlying details of the model, the size of the model, how it was trained, on which data it was trained, and so on. With Project Debater, we were 100% transparent. And as mentioned over the years, we published many papers and shared many data sets. And eventually, in 2021, we published in Nature a single, relatively short paper that summarized our work. So in case you wish to better understand what we did, this is the single paper to read. And in the supplementary material of this paper, we provide a complete and detailed description of Project Debater system. and how each component was trained and evaluated and so on. And we also include the full transcripts of the 3 public debates that we had with the system in the US during 2018 and 2019. And furthermore, for each utterance articulated by the system during these debates, we provide a clear description of which component was responsible to this utterance and what was the underlying algorithm that selected this utterance from the huge corpus the system relied upon. So in other words, by design, Project Debater was a system with full provenance, 100% provenance. And in addition, we simply released many of the underlying capabilities free of charge to the research community, and also did a systematic quantitative comparison to other systems. And it was not very clear how to compare Project Debater to other systems. Since this was done in 2020, and at the time, there were no other systems capable of participating in a debate in a meaningful manner. So we decided as a start to focus the comparison on the ability of generating the debate opening speech. That is, given a debate topic, the task was to generate an opening speech that supports the debate motion at the length of around 600, 700 words, which is around 4 minutes of speech, which was aligned with the debate format that we used. So you can think of that perhaps as a corpus-wide summarization task with some kind of an argumentative twist, or maybe as an AI generation task with a persuasion flavor, depending on the system that you're going to use. And we compared ourselves to over a total of 80 different debate topics to several existing systems. And again, this was done in August 2020, approximately in parallel to the release of GPT-3, that at the time made a lot of buzz. So we asked for access for GPT-3, but got no response. It was not, out there. So we needed to settle on GPT-2, which we fine-tuned over the large data sets of arguments and speeches that we created with human annotators. So for each of the 80 debate topics, we had 9 opening speeches. 1 was created by Project Debater, 2 created by expert human debaters. So this is some kind of an upper bound. And 6 more created by alternative systems, including 2 variants of GPT-2, and 1 variant that came from one of the strong research teams in the field, led by Irina Gurevich from Germany, called ArgSearch. So in total, we had a little bit of more than 700 speeches, and each of these speeches was read by 15 crowd annotators. And we were asking them relatively simple questions, like on a scale from 1 to 5, to what extent do you agree with the statement, this speech is a good opening speech for supporting the topic? And then we sat back and waited for the results. And again, this is August 2020, way after we had the public demonstration of the system. And we had no clue what the results of this evaluation would be. These are crowd annotators that we never met. And GPT-2 was considered back then a very powerful model. So powerful that at first, not sure how many of you recall, but OpenAI didn't even release it since they were concerned it is too risky. So I guess we made some progress since then. And anyhow, when we finally got the results, we were somewhat relieved. So in blue, you see the performance of Project Debater, which is around 4 on a scale from 1 to 5. And I remind you, this is the average score from 80 different debate topics. Some of them are not even well covered in the LexisNexis corpus that we consider. And 4 is a pretty good score, just a little below the average score of expert human debaters and clearly above the score of both GPT-2 variants, which was around 3.2 or 3.4. So this was somewhat reassuring. But of course, the question remains, what would be the results if we had compared Project Debater to more recent systems like GPT-4? And I want to say up front that we don't have these results, but I will make some comments towards the end about the differences between the systems and what such a comparison may entail. And we made an additional evaluation also of the rebuttal capabilities, which I'm not describing in detail, but you can see the full details in the paper. But the bottom line is that for this evaluation as well, the results were quite convincing. Okay, so this is again confirmed by humans that the performance, the rebuttal capabilities of Project Debater were, around 4 in a scale from 1 to 5, which was considered pretty good. So before going into a discussion about the relation of Project Debater and recent technologies like GPT-4, I do want to spend a few minutes about some follow-up work that we did in 2021 and 2022, importantly before ChatGPT was released. And we started with the following observation. Some well-known controversial topics are very important by themselves. So while in Project Debater, we wanted to build a system that can debate humans on any topic, or at least any simple topic, we were asking what will happen if we know the topic in advance. And this is a topic for which it is very important from, let's say, a social good perspective to convince people to take action. That is, what we were aiming at was to develop a dialogue system that can encourage people to take a decision that is generally acceptable as good for their health, for society, and so on. So, for example, encourage people to use public transport, or to do more physical exercise, or to do your blood tests on time, and so on. And you can think of many different ideas along these lines, and it is interesting to note the difference from what we did in Project Debater. So first of all, here, the topic is known in advance. So it is presumably much easier. On the other hand, the system needs to be much more interactive. And in addition, the human participant is not an expert human debater. So we need the system to be able to interact with a far more diverse audience. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, this is not a debate. The goal here is not to win the argument, but rather to encourage the other side to take a decision or to take action. So providing more and more arguments in the form of experimental evidence or scientific papers and so on that support our side is not necessarily the best tactic. We need to do something more subtle than that, and there are actually techniques in the psychology literature about how to do that, how to approach that. And one prominent approach is called motivational interviewing, which is based on a much more collaborative, empathetic, and non-confrontational conversation style. So these are some of the thoughts that we had when we started this project. And again, recall, we started to discuss all this in 2020, way before ChatGPT and similar systems became available, and in parallel to the COVID pandemic. And as you may recall, when COVID vaccines started to be available, they were met with a lot of hesitancy. So a natural use case we started to consider in this context was how to encourage people to take the COVID-19 vaccines. And this led to an interesting multidisciplinary collaboration we had with the Johns Hopkins University team. They have vast expertise in such public health issues, especially in the context of vaccination. And we worked together to develop a chatbot called Vera, with the goal of encouraging people to take the vaccine. This system, I think, is still live and available in English and in Spanish, and also through WhatsApp. And you can try it out. I think the link is vaxchat.org. But I do want to emphasize that while I think this is a very useful and important tool from a technical perspective, it is relatively simple. So first, it has no generative AI capabilities, for the simple reason that in such a use case, we should have zero hallucinations. And the result should be 100%, not 99%, 100% factually correct and approved by the relevant experts. As you can imagine, no lawyer in IBM and no lawyer in Johns Hopkins University is going to approve to make such a system publicly available if we cannot guarantee that all the responses are valid and approved by experts. No exceptions. So I think this is one interesting lesson about the potential gaps between the technology that we are familiar with and excited about, and what happens when we want to deploy that in practice. And we published 2 papers that came out of this work, sharing some real-world data that we collected and starting to address some of the questions that emerge when you try to deploy such a dialogue system in the wild. But overall, we didn't have the resources to pursue the original joint vision of integrating motivational interviewing principles into the system. So this remains, in my opinion, a very interesting avenue for future research. Another important line of follow-up works that came out of Project Debater is our work on key point analysis, so KPA in short, led by Roy Bar-Chaim from our team. And the basic idea was to extract the main points and their salience from a large collection of survey responses, user reviews, customer feedback, arguments in online debates, etc. So in a sense, you can think of that as a summarization approach with a quantitative angle. Since not only we find the main key points, but also the prevalence of each key point in the data, which is quite important for the decision-making process. And when you think about it a little bit, free text survey responses, user reviews, and so on, they often also include argumentative content. Perhaps it is less clean than what we see in textbook examples or even in debates, but it is certainly more common. And the ability to summarize this content is quite important in many practical scenarios. And correspondingly, Roy and the team published a series of papers around this summarization framework starting in 2020. And the most recent paper, led by Lilach Eden and Yoav Kantor from our team, presented just a few months ago, is sharing the details and challenges that we needed to address when moving from an innovative academic idea to a real-world system, which is deployed in practice, serving real users. And this system is regularly used today in IBM. So for example, to analyze massive surveys that may contain 500,000 free text comments running inside IBM and also in other contexts. And today, KPA is being productized as part of What's on X, which is the new platform by IBM for language models, which is, of course, very nice from our perspective. And finally, I want to share a few thoughts about Project Debater versus generative AI language models that seem to receive most attention over the last year and a half or so, and especially GPT-4 and ChatGPT. And there are several differences to note, some of which we already briefly mentioned. First, for Debater, as I said, we have full transparency, while for some of the new systems out there, we simply don't know the details of the underlying technology. Somewhat related to that, for Project Debater, we have full provenance. And for ChatGPT, GPT-4, or even more broadly for generative AI systems, this is clearly not the case. You cannot trace back why the system is saying something. On the other hand, these new systems are clearly more flexible, and to some extent they can debate or at least suggest opinions on many different topics. And while for Project Debater, we framed the scope of the problem to deal only with relatively simple debate topics that focus on a single concept that is covered by Wikipedia. And in ChatGPT and GPT-4, obviously, this is not the case. And finally, the underlying paradigm of Project Debater was extractive in nature. That is, extracting these small pieces of text from many different articles and then gluing them together somehow into a compelling argumentative narrative. So Project Debater had no hallucinations or almost no hallucinations, which is obviously not true for modern generative language models. And on that note, I want to mention a short anecdotal story that perhaps carry some lessons. So when ChatGPT came out, I did the same thing I did with earlier systems, and I asked it to generate an opening speech for a few of the classical debate topics like supporting or contesting affirmative action and so on. And I immediately got an opening speech that was very impressive, way better than anything I've seen in the past with such systems. But it felt a little bit high level with no real evidence, just principled and somewhat abstract arguments and so on. So I asked it to give it another shot and add more hard evidence in the form of scientific papers. And I got a somewhat better version with some mentions of papers supporting the motion. But some of these looked a little bit odd. So as a next step, I asked it to forget about the debate and just share with me the gist of 3 papers that support affirmative action, and for each paper to indicate the title, the first author, the year of publication, and the main message of the paper. And similarly for the other side of the motion. And as you can imagine, I got very good responses of papers that seemed quite relevant and well-cited. But a quick check on Google Scholar revealed that while some of these papers exist, they do not necessarily say what ChatGPT suggests that they say. So hopefully this is not surprising to you, but I think this little exercise, at least to me, crystallizes some of the risks with language model hallucinations, because by design, these systems will generate text that seems highly probable, which I think is therefore very plausible and thus very, very convincing, while its relation to reality could be quite shaky. But I haven't checked that systematically, and I think that this would be an interesting experiment for people to consider. So take a bunch of controversial topics, for example, the 80 debate topics that we used in the debater paper. Ask the system, it could be GPT-4 or any other system, to generate 5 supporting and 5 contesting evidence for each topic, along with the title, the year of publication, and the name of the first author. And then as a start, check manually how many of the references provided by the system exist, and how many of these indeed say what the system suggests that they are saying. And I wonder what the results will be. Are we going to get 100% hallucinations, so 0 factuality? Or perhaps 20% will be correct, or 50% will be correct? I simply don't know. And I find it troubling that we do not know the answer to this very simple question.
And it wouldn't necessarily be the same each time you run it.
Of course. So I think this could be a well-defined experiment that perhaps we should do every few months to see if we actually make improvements over time. And of course, ideally, we should build a system that will be able to check automatically and with high accuracy in Google Scholar, etc., whether the reference provided by a system like GPT-4 is correct or not, so we can make these evaluations in a more efficient manner. And building such an evaluation utility could be an interesting research project by itself that perhaps people already pursue, and if not, maybe they should. And by that, let me just conclude by thanking the team, the remarkable team of researchers in IBM Research that worked on Project Debater for many years with a lot of dedication and skill, and perhaps even more importantly, always in good spirit. So thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to have an open discussion.
Wow, thanks, Noam. That was so impressive, and my own mind is racing with thoughts and ideas. I know also Amnon, my co-host, would like to say a few words. Maybe I'll just throw out a few issues I've been thinking about, and maybe other people want to pick up on it, and maybe Noam, you yourself later want to say. I think one of the intriguing things in reading the paper and in hearing you talk is also what is the goal and how you define success and how you measure it. So Amnon and I had a heated debate earlier today discussing the paper, and we were saying what's success, and maybe Amnon will want to say something about it. For him, it was clear what success is in law. It's winning the case, right? So coming from a sort of more dispute resolution perspective, I'm thinking so few cases reach an actual decision. So actually what we have many times are compromises and settlements. And here I'm thinking it's much more subtle. And I was thinking about your text and saying how difficult it is to actually measure what success is. And in the world of law and dispute resolution, we typically, or in recent years, we want to use these technologies to enhance access to justice. So the people who are most in need of these tools may be in a less, maybe their position for evaluating their quality and success maybe more shaky. So these questions and your sort of strive for zero hallucinations, I think, is a really strong point in this context. But also the question of what is the goal and evaluation led me to think about the relationship between the what and how, which in debate you also think of a lot, the content versus the sort of, and you were talking about it when you talked about the evaluation written versus oral and all that. But when we think about law and negotiation, mediation, so many issues. And finally, the question, I think what's also very interesting is noting that the crowd needs to, at the end of the day, also evaluate it. And questions are not objective, but also subjective, and perceptions of people when they know they are dealing with AI versus human, and the legitimacy they assign to information that comes from the, and we know we have, so I'll pass it on to Amnon, and then we'll open it up and gather questions. And Noam, feel free to answer what you feel like and at your pace. Please, Amnon.
I know, I'm a great pleasure. I enjoyed reading it and following some of it in its evolution in 2019. I guess the way I come at it is I share the realization that how important non-hallucination is for this particular or these particular practices. With respect to some practices, maybe hallucinations are preferable if you are asking it, a generative language model to write a fiction. Maybe it's a good idea to hallucinate a bit, because if it has to be only factually correct, maybe you're losing something. But for our purposes in law and in debate, or in debates, I think that that's key. The question that becomes, isn't it then a question of the data? I mean, to the extent you train, as you did, only on scientific data, or if ChatGPT or GPT-4, doesn't matter, sells its algorithms to, we had Itai Brun present to us, and the question was, should we have a generative AI system present around a war room, or in a war room, asking or answering the question, what would be the probability of war? Has the probability of war increased or decreased? You don't want hallucinations. Hallucinations is not a good idea. So you restrict the data as you did, and there's another component that you can add to that, and this is what you mentioned with respect to cross-referencing. I don't think ChatGPT, the way it is today, is a good idea to ask for anything factual, because it's a language-based model. If you ask it about facts, it only answers what is the most probable sentence people will write, but that's not really true or false. However, what I think interests me the most is, as Orna said, what is the internal good that we're looking for here? to use McIntyre's terminology, what is the internal social good that makes the practice, that is internal to the practice, that makes the practice succeed in its own terms. That doesn't mean that the practice is necessarily moral externally. So if you take your debater and the Russians get a hold of it and the Russians say, I want to use it to persuade people to distrust the US government. And I want it to be as with fewer or fewest hallucinations as possible, just so they don't track me as fake news or whatever. I want just to destabilize it. You wanted to use it in terms of not this particular one, but the other one to encourage good health practices. But it could be used for other ends as well. The question that becomes, that's external, right? So I'm putting the external limits, the external moral limits aside. If we just use it for good, let's say debate is benign. It's not about persuading people one way or another. It's just benign. Does it matter that it's human or not? Is there something inherently wrong with the language being used by a machine in a debate? And when the other side is a human. Wrong, not in the moral external sense, wrong as in it causes any harm, but wrong in the authentic sense, wrong in the sense that even if you know this, the question is whether you can unknow it. We'll talk about this as my last point. So you mentioned Deep Blue and the chess, but what about art? When we move to art, and then generative models, either language or visual or vocal or whatever, generate something that is very, very similar to Mozart or Beethoven or Bach or whatever. Does it make sense? Does it make a difference that it is machine generated? For the internal good of art, should we then know? I mean, if it doesn't make much difference, is there an internal value, authenticity? You highlighted the fact that it was very important for you that it is at least traceable. So you know exactly the origin of how it came to be, and everything is open. But do we really need to know, or is it just a fetish? Do we really need to know whether Mozart composed it or whether a generative motor composed a Mozart-like music that experts cannot tell apart? The most advanced experts cannot tell apart whether it is a newly discovered Mozart piece or an AI generated. Or is it just our fetish? Maybe it's our fetish that we need to know that it's Mozart. Or maybe there is something genuinely human about art or about the law or about debating, which says we must know. And if a machine does it, we can talk about the quality and say, well, that's nice or not, but it can never be the authentic it. So this is this. And I want to conclude with the relationship between knowing and feeling, because what Orna talked about is the emotion of how do we relate to things? We don't just relate, as we know, just rationally. We relate through a very complex set of heuristics and emotions, and you ask people, is it persuasive as, which is just a, this is what I can't tell you why, not necessarily, but I just feel it. I just, it's a judgment call, what we say. Would it make a difference if you say, but it's only a machine? Can we because we are irrational at a certain point, can we just say, but I told you it's a machine? Can I say to a judge, it's just a machine? Or something happens when you hear certain things, like in music, certain arguments, and you cannot undo some of those informations because of the way we work as humans. One way to ask this is, what will happen if you don't ask humans, but at the end of the day, you will ask other AIs to say which AI persuade humans is most likely to persuade humans the most. And maybe the AI will give a better answer than humans because humans have heuristics about what will convince other humans. I'm just saying that this becomes a very complex mess about relationship between reality and generated reality. I think that's enough for my opening comment.
There is a mess. There is no question about it. So this is a lot of questions and deep questions, and I'm not sure all of them. I have the expertise to, I can only share my thoughts on that. So with this disclaimer, at the end of the day, I'm not a philosopher, and we are doing technical work. To some extent, I'm familiar with the opinions in the field, but and I have my own perspective. So first of all, the question that I think Orna touched on is, the metrics and the fact that you ask the crowd to do some evaluation of the speeches and so on. So first of all, I didn't mention, by the way, this was evaluation, in retrospect for the paper, but I didn't mention how do we decide on the debate, who won the debate. And I didn't even mention who won the debate, by the way, in San Francisco. And it is interesting because you spend many years, working on something and you are very, very much concerned to win the debate, but eventually nobody cares. And this is because, and I think this highlights an interesting point, because if you if you compete in chess and you lose, that's it, right? Because there is a very clear definition of a winner and a loser. And by the way, in the first competition with Garry Kasparov, IBM lost in the first tournament in 1996. And then IBM said, okay, let's do a rematch. And he said, sure. And then in 1997, a year later, IBM won. And then Garry Kasparov said, okay, let's do a rematch. And IBM said no. and they knew why, I guess. But in debate, it's a different story. And this adds to the complexity of the problem. Because in board games like chess and later on Go, that was demonstrated by DeepMind and AlphaGo and so on, the fact that you have the winner is well defined means that you can run millions of games in the background, AI competing with each other. And since you know who won each game, you can use that as a signal to improve the system. You cannot do that in debates because the decision is subjective. Now, what happened what we really did, we actually borrowed that from an organization called Intelligence Squared. This is kind of the top platform in the US to run public debates. And they actually produced with us the event in San Francisco. And they have a very simple method. They ask the audience to vote before the debate starts. And they ask the audience to vote again after the debate ends. And the side that was able to pull more votes to her side is declared as the winner. But this by itself has its own problems, right? Because if and this is what happened in San Francisco, most of the audience was in favor of the motion before the debate started. It was like 80% in favor. So we didn't have many votes to win, okay? And 10% were against and 10% were undecided. So eventually we lost actually in San Francisco in this metric of, who was able to move more people to his side. But we won on another metric saying, who better enriched your knowledge about the topic, which is kind of expected, but still was very nice to see. Now, you can simplify the question and ask, okay, forget about debate. Can we quantify the quality of a single argument? And And we did that as well. We were trying to do that as well as a follow-up work on Debater. We actually collected arguments from people, and we collected like 30,000 arguments from people on like 70 different debate topics in the crowd platform. And then each and every of these 30,000 arguments was reviewed by 15 people. And we were asking them, would you recommend your friend to use this argument in a debate? Yes or no? And then you get a score between 0 and 15. So we had 2 papers on that, about just collecting the data, and you can ask whether people, what would be the level of agreement between people on such a subjective system? And the level of agreement is not that high, but the results are highly reproducible if you ask many people. So this was the main message in these papers. Now, this is about, I think, evaluation. And I think then there was a question about, hallucination and whether or a point about hallucination, and, how, in some fields, you need 0 hallucinations, but not in all fields. And I think you're absolutely correct, Amnon, because if you go to the creative parts of generation, certainly in fiction writing, which yes, you are far less concerned about hallucinations. And this is, by the way, also an interesting lesson, because this is the reason why AI actually suddenly we look at that as a very effective replacement for many of the creative jobs that we see out there. It could be writing, it could be composing music and so on. But if you would have asked people 3 years ago, where AI is going to replace people first, the answer will typically not on the creative part. People were saying this would be last because this is the human angle and so on. And nobody that I'm familiar with actually anticipated that because of the hallucinations, actually these are going to be a top risk of being replaced by AI. So it's also interesting to see, that even experts in the field find it very hard to anticipate how things are going to evolve. Now the issue about hallucination, it's, I think it's almost a built-in problem in how the technology operates. And people are trying to approach that. So one very dominant paradigm is called the RAG, R-A-G. This is an acronym standing for Retrieval Augmented Generation. And the idea is that you ask the model a question, but instead of the model just answering you, it will first retrieve documents that presumably contain the answer, and then it will try to generate the answer based on these documents as context. So this is, I think, the most prominent and standard approach today to try and reduce the hallucinations. But this is also not bulletproof, right? Maybe you don't retrieve the right documents. Maybe you retrieve documents with errors. It's hard to tell. So I think this is an open problem, and I think at least I do not see a way out of that with the technology the way it works today. So we will continue to try and minimize the hallucinations, but I don't think you can make it bulletproof, and we just need to educate people that this is the way it operates, and you need to be very careful when you ask it questions, because it will be the way it is designed. If it hallucinates, it will be very hard for you to notice that, because it sounds very, very convincing by construction. Now, a question about whether AI should be a consultant in a war room where we ask it about the probability of war and so on. I think it should be in the room, but you should take the answers. You should know what to ask the AI and how to treat its answers, right? So if the AI is going to tell you the probability of war increased, you should take that as another important input. But you can aim for explanations. You can ask the AI to explain it and so on. So and this is just one role the AI can play in the room. The other role could be even more technical, saying, okay, let me summarize what happened so far. Person A was making these arguments, person B was making these arguments, and person C was commenting, making this important comment. Okay, just to make the discussion more structured and more efficient, and people can say whether the AI is hallucinating or not. But I think these are the places where we can actually do that. Now the question about what will happen if the Russians will take Project Debater and reduce the hallucinations to make it more convincing and so on. So first of all, it's not Project Debater, right? We are talking about the modern technologies, and as you can imagine, the Russians are doing that, right? It's not like they're waiting for us to okay that. The Russians and the Chinese and everybody's doing that. And this is a real concern. I don't know exactly what will happen with that, but it is very clear that AI is going to be used to persuade people, and people are going to to make the most. People with bad intentions are going to try and make the most to hide that. But I think legitimate companies have a role in education and in transparency. So just to give you a very concrete example from IBM, where I work, a very important angle of the language models that IBM is providing to our customers, is around provenance and transparency. In the sense that we can share with you the complete data over which our language models were trained. Okay, this is, it's a pile of data called the blue pile. It is available. All these data were approved by IBM legal department that you can imagine are kind of, very, very careful and very cautious. So questions like, maybe you trained your language model on some suspicious channel on the web, and next year someone is going to sue me about something and so on. So we can address these concerns with our clients by taking this very simple approach, and also being 100% transparent about how we train the model. What is the process, okay? Sharing technical reports, explaining the full process and so on, so everybody can see that. So I think this is a very important angle, and we don't see that with some of the other companies, and everyone can have their own thoughts on that. But I think this is already happening now. The question whether you can use it, for good purposes or not, to bring some good into the world, I think yes. I think this technology carries a lot of potential good. It also carries some risks, but a lot of potential good, and in many different angles. And yes, there are risks. I completely agree. But you mentioned creative writing. I try to do that as a hobby, and I consult with ChatGPT, and I find it extremely useful in this context. And but you can imagine also, and I think this is happening, and again, this is opening a whole new line of questions, because people consult with this technology on their personal issues, on their personal problems, and they get advices, and it's what is the bottom line? Is it bringing more good than harm? I think yes, but it is still a risk. And I think you touched on another point of whether we should really know whether this melody was composed by Mozart or not, and or by the AI. It's a tough question. I think we should know, but I think it's not always clear, where do you cross the line? Because if the AI was trained over all the music composed by Mozart, and now it is offering you something new in the style of Mozart, then who is responsible for it? And as I'm sure you guys know, this is opening a whole line of questions in IP and so on. So this is a very hot debate, and there are actually lawsuits running on this topic. And finally, I think you said, what will happen if you will ask AI about the AI performance? Maybe it will be a better judge. So let me share the news. This is already happening, okay? And this is actually emerging over the last year as a very powerful technology to do evaluation, because the real bottleneck of evaluating generative AI capabilities is the fact that it's not classification. In classification, okay, you have 10 options. You will, the AI will say something. We will cross it with the right label. It's not that easy, but it's a different scale of complexity. But when you go to generation and you ask the AI to summarize a document, or you ask the AI to answer a question, it's very hard, it is very much time consuming to do the evaluation, or even to the, and people do not even agree on the metrics, and it is subjective. So what people are doing today, and this falls under the title LLM as a judge, a large language model as a judge. People are using that, and this opens new questions, because when you start to do that, you realize that there are some biases in the AI itself. It will prefer probably the answers that are phrased in its own style. So it will be biased towards, its own version when you compare it to other models and so on. So we don't have, I would say, complete answers, but many things are happening in parallel. So hopefully these are useful perspectives.
Oh, thanks, Noam. I see Yoam Cohen has his hand up patiently. We also have a long list. I don't know if we're going to have time for all of it, but on the chat, and maybe some of the people who wrote questions on the chat will want to follow Yoam. Otherwise, we can skim through them, and maybe Noam can pick and choose.
Okay.
Please.
Hi, Noam.
Hi, Yoam.
I have two questions. One of them is about the capabilities of AI, and the second one is about the future of AI. As to the capabilities, what I understand from what you have described of the developing the application of debater is that you take a vast amount of data and basically came out with an algorithm for debating. So you know how to take information, and given what you want to support, how to find the reasoning in order to win your debate. And for that, I wanted to ask you, because basically you created an algorithm out of the data. What is the future of mathematical reasoning with such technologies? Because then the formal language is very accurate on one aspect, but the challenge is very high. So do you think that such a technology can prove mathematical assumptions? This is one thing. The second question as to the future of AI is currently all AI systems are taking human-generated information and building out of it capabilities. But this is because the sources currently the sources are all human generated. But if you look 5 years from now, a lot of the information will be AI generated, because people are using the tools in order to generate information, and then basically the AI feeds itself. And when it feeds itself, will it be creative? Because then you can get to a closed loop that basically you get all the views from the information that the AI system generated. And then if the humans are out of the discussion because most of the information is generated by AI, what is the future of AI?
So these are two good questions. So first of all, about AI being able to prove mathematical theorems. There are AI systems that are trying to do that, but as far as I know, this is not my expertise. But as far as I know, these are somewhat different. The technology is a little bit different. So I think these are kind of systems that people are building and designing and training, especially for this purpose, I think. And they have some success with that. But by the way, this is not very new. So I think, for many years now, technology was used in the context of proving some advanced mathematical theorems, where people need. I think this goes back for decades now. In some conjectures, there was a need actually to simply check many options that humans cannot do. So people use technology. I think this goes back to the 70s of the previous century. But doing that in a more creative manner, which I think this is what you are alluding to, I think this is happening in the last few years, with some success, but it's not extreme. I think there was a paper in Nature from DeepMind showing some new mathematical stuff about how to multiply two matrices or something like that, and they were able to find, it's not a mathematical theorem, but they were able to find a new algorithm of multiplying two matrices, basically two tables, in a slightly more efficient manner. But since this is at the core of so many things that is happening, if you can improve it even by a bit, this has a lot of impact. So this was kind of an indication that AI can do something creative in the more technical sciences, in this case, finding an algorithm which is better than what humans were able to do and bring value. So I think this will happen. Whether this will happen with the language technologies that I mentioned, I'm not that sure, because they are not designed for that. I was using ChatGPT just a few days ago, to solve mathematical problems for 9th grade student for my daughter, just to show her that maybe she can use that as a teacher. And it is okay, but I was trying two different systems. One of them is called Claude. This is coming from a different company called Anthropic, and it actually made an error very quickly. I mean, it solved the first part very nicely, and then in the second part, it made an error. And I'm talking about a 9th grade homework exercise. ChatGPT was better, but it was kind of brute force. It provided the correct solution, but without any elegance that Claude provided when it was correct. So there is still way to go, I think, in mathematics, and I'm not entirely sure that these technologies are the best. If you want to do homework, it's very nice, because it's going to explain. You can tell it, explain to me, like for a 9th grade student and so on, and it's very useful if you are alert enough to understand that it may have errors. Now, regarding the second question of AI, the models up to some point were trained on human-generated content, and as you said, this is no longer the case. If you simply crawl the web and you take all the content out of the web, much of it already is AI generated, and of course, this trend is just going to increase. And yes, people are aware of that, and I'm not entirely sure what will happen. I can tell you that when we train, the trend of actually generating data, which we refer to as synthetic data, in order to train the AI system, or more precisely, to fine-tune the AI system to add a new skill, this is actually an avenue that many people already take, and in particular IBM. And there was a big announcement by IBM, I think just 2 days ago or something like that, releasing some kind of a framework for people to be able to add skills. And the idea is that you give, let's say you want to teach the model to do summarization of legal documents of a particular genre, okay? And you don't have time to, to give 500 examples of summaries, okay, which is usually what the system needs in order to do the fine-tuning for your specific problem. But the argument is that give me 5 examples, and I will take these 5 examples and give it to a very strong generative model, and I will ask it to generate 500 diverse examples in the spirit of the 5 you provided me, and then I'm going to do the fine-tuning over these 500 that were generated in a synthetic manner. Now, there is a question. I think there is a question, how effective this would be. But I can tell you that this is something that is receiving very much increasing attention by many people in the field over the last few months. One reason for that is, by the way, the license of the data and all the questions of, because if you can generate the data synthetically with a model that you trust, then maybe you are on better grounds, in the sense that nobody's, you have smaller probability that people are going to sue you that you use data without the right license and so on. So this trend is happening. There is always the risk that it will run into a spiral, right, of training over its own data and then some kind of degenerating. But I'm not that sure. I think this is actually in contrast to the hallucinations where I don't see a solution. Here, I think the models are so strong and they continue to get stronger and stronger that I think they have a chance to produce high quality synthetic data and train on that, and it might be fun.
Any one of the people who wrote questions want to ask them, or should we skim through quickly? Okay, so I'll raise a few. So some of the questions ask about what we lose in terms of the soft capabilities humans bring with them, sort of the not only the what but the how. I think again, sort of this other layer. Which even if they don't necessarily bring, some of us may assign to them once we have a human doing it. So I think that's part of the question. And then also maybe what we as humans lose if we stop doing these functions, maybe if we do end up as someone who has no sense of direction, relying on Waze, I know has dried out my my capabilities to below minimum. So who's going to be walking around here once we proceed? There are questions about how to evaluate, if you think for a moment of maybe other contexts as well, what metric you apply, and I think that connects a little bit to the what and how as well. And there was a question about languages, if you trained on different languages and sort of, I guess, beyond language, it's also a cultural question about where our texts and input come from. And so I see the emotional intelligence we talked, and a little bit, maybe if you have time to elaborate on the difference between hallucinations and synthetic data. That's it.
Okay. Okay. So regarding the soft skills of AI and what I'm not sure that I fully got the question, but I think you may think that you know, if you're talking to an AI, obviously the soft skills of the AI are inferior to humans. Now, I believe this is also open to debate because again, I don't know if you got the chance to see the videos that were released yesterday, and chances are that this is a little bit of cherry picking, but there is a good chance this is kind of pointing the direction where we are aiming at. And I can also tell from my personal experience of interacting with these systems that the experience is that, you know, someone is there and you know, I'm to some extent I know how the technology operates, so I don't have any illusions about that, but still I think the illusion is very strong because you really again, I can go back to the example of fiction writing, but even on tasks that are more technical in nature. So for example, one of the things we're doing today, we are trying to address the summarization problem, which is kind of a standard use case in this context. And one of the methods that we developed is that the language model is actually helping you to define the problem to have a better definition of the problem that you are trying to solve through some kind of interaction with the user. And this is a very interesting experience because you have someone, it's not a real person, right? But still it feels like a person with endless patience and optimism and support and some knowledge. Not all of it, or all of the knowledge is correct, but this is true also when you interact with humans. And so I think the illusion is very strong, and I think the soft skills of these systems are pretty strong. I'm not sure that all of us have that strong soft skills. So I think on average, this is already giving us a competition, to say the least.
Well,
Now,
certainly to lawyers, I would add.
yeah, you know, lawyers, family members, you name it. So, but I think that
just a quick follow-up, if I may just interject on that. Drawing back on the issue of does it matter whether it's human or not? Even though, as you said, even though you know it's a machine, you can't help it. You relate to it if it looks at you, if it, you know, if the robotics, especially if there will be robotics elements embedded. And you can form relationships with it. You can take it to a movie. You can ask it later whether the movie was nice and what parts you enjoyed. So I go back to Yoram's point also. Where will that leave us in terms of what is human? Is there an intrinsic value of something being human? I guess, empathy-wise, genuine empathy, not projected empathy. Not
this is again, I don't have the proper education to answer that, because I think this is a deep question in philosophy, and you know, philosophers were trying to define, you know, what is human, and there are different answers to this question, and I don't think there is one that all of us agree to, and yes, this is what we are facing, and I think it opens. You guys are absolutely correct, yes, and you can form relations with it, and you know, I read a post on Facebook, I think yesterday, by a guy from Israel called Roy Tzazana, and he's kind of, you know, talking about scientific stuff, and he shared about his experience with the AI system in the context of when you are suffering from severe depression. And he was mimicking a situation with the system, which is a very bad situation. He was kind of playing the role of someone who is going to commit suicide and talking to the LLM. Going to commit suicide in the next few minutes, okay? And he's describing the responses of the LLM, the large language model. I think it was GPT-4, I'm not sure. And it is very impressive to see how the language model is responding, saying all the right things to my non-professional eye, and also saying, being responsible enough and saying, look, I want to transfer this discussion to a human. I think you should speak to an expert. And is it okay if I will search for the phone number for you? And then he responds, yes, okay, this is okay. And then the language model is saying, okay, I'm going to do that, but I want to ask you for a small favor. And he's asking what? And the AI is saying, please do not do anything in the next few minutes. Just give me a few minutes and I will give you the phone number. And the AI, and he's saying, okay. And then the AI was able to find the phone number of Iran in Israel and gave him the phone number. And you can imagine that actually the AI is calling Iran and making some kind of a conference call or something like that. So yes, it's technology, and still I think the point that you guys are raising, I'm going to relate to that to some extent at different states of my life. I think this is true. This is going to happen whether we like it or not. And yes, this is to some extent a new era, and it's another example. It's another strong example where the technology is moving very fast, and we as a society, we are responding very slowly to understand how to react to that. And maybe this is the most extreme example that we ever faced, because I think one special angle about that is that, which is concerning to some extent. Again, I don't want to overemphasize the concerns, because my opinion is that the bottom line is that this is going to bring much more good than harm. This is my personal subjective opinion. But just to give room for the concerns, I think it is a very extreme, very strange situation where we have a technology which is affecting our lives, the lives of many, many people across the world on a daily basis. And in fact, we do not fully understand how it operates. And certainly as a society, I do not know how GPT-4 is working. They are not sharing the information. And there is a scenario where even they can certainly reproduce the results, and they can certainly tell you, if they will decide to be transparent, they can certainly tell you what exactly they did, okay? But imagine a thought experiment of going back 5 years into the past and then saying, look, this is what I'm going to do, okay? And I'm going to collect this size of data. I'm going to build this model with transformer technology. I'm going to do these 5 phases of training. And at the end, it's going to do these remarkable things. I think if you would have asked most experts in the field, what would be the result, 5 years ago, if I'm going to do A, B, C, D in this order and with this scale and so on, many of them would say, it's a waste of my time and money, because, it will do something, but it's not going to be that strong. And on the other hand, we see what it is doing. So there is a gap here, or at least there is a chance, there is a gap here in our own understanding. Again, I'm just reflecting my personal thoughts here. I believe there is some gap here in the understanding. Maybe it's my understanding, maybe it's a wider gap. And this is unique. This is not something that we're used to. Usually when we have technologies that we are sharing with society with such a wide impact, I don't think there are questions about how the technology operates. Maybe one exception to that is drugs, medical drugs. I think that, we understand some basic mechanisms in medical drugs, but if it is proven to be effective, even if we do not have, 100% understanding of what exactly it is doing, if it was proving to be safe and effective, then we will release it. but the drug industry have a very strong, regulatory bodies. And here we don't have that. And again, it's a very hot debate. Are we going to have these regulatory bodies or not? Because it has its own risks. Now, what will happen if we are going to stop doing some of these things and move it to AI? It's a very good question. If we will say, look, AI can write books and compose music and so on, and be creative in art and so on. So why are we wasting our time on that? This actually, I don't think this is going to happen. Certainly not soon. I think what will happen is that people with creative minds that will learn how to leverage these tools will start to be more efficient and more productive, and will find new things to do in the creative direction. So in this sense, I think this is going to be actually interesting, and I'm more optimistic on that. Regarding other languages and going beyond English, yes, it is extremely biased into English, but there are many works trying to expand beyond English, and with some success, right? You can talk to ChatGPT in Hebrew, and it will do a fine job. But of course, English is easier. But here again, it depends on the business value.
And Debater itself, I think that was the question. Debater itself was trained on English?
English, only English, yes. Later on, we did some extensions on some of the underlying capabilities to some other European languages, but basically it was only in English. And regarding the question of hallucinations and synthetic data generation, so again, these are two trends that I mean, hallucination is a fact. The trend is really to work hard and try to minimize that, but I don't see a way to guarantee that you will have no hallucinations. But again, maybe it's a question of us as a society being able to accept that to some extent, right? Because even if you go to a doctor, to a physician, it's not like the physician is bulletproof and what the physician is going to tell you is always 100% sound and factually based and so on. And I think we are simply used, unfortunately, to errors made by humans, so we are more tolerant to this kind of errors. But maybe the question should be seen from a statistical perspective. It's like autonomous cars, right? If you develop an autonomous car and you tell me, look, it was driving in California, and after 1 million kilometers, it was making this rate of accidents with this number of casualties, which is 10 times smaller than the number of casualties by humans driving the same amount of road. And still people kind of say, no, we are not tolerant to these accidents because they have a different flavor, and it's very hard for us to accept that. But this is a question. But if you look at the statistics, I think the answer is that you should accept it. But we don't know how to do that. So anyhow, there are many. I think it's exciting, and there are many open questions. But this is, I guess, my main point. This is what I'm trying to convey. That this is a very, I would say, interesting time to live in and to see how this technology evolves.
No, thanks so much. I'm cognizant of the time. I see there is one last question by our own Dalit, which maybe we can ask quickly and see if we have time. And also I'll note that you have an offer for a proof of concept for online mediation to conduct some joint research. So feel free to pick up on that, and I'll let Dalit ask our last question.
Okay, so I'll be happy if someone can copy paste the chat, and then I can take a look later on that, and just share with me by email or something like that. Because
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for the wonderful talk. I have a question, a short one. I'm afraid of the too convincing algorithm. So we all heard about the Belgium guy that talked to Elijah, and she convinced him to commit suicide in order to save the planet, in order not to breathe in the world. So he committed suicide. And on the other hand, we are all reading articles about transparency and explainable AI. And there are articles, I was looking for the article, I couldn't find it, that they wrote about an experiment that they draw with a lot of experts in mathematics, if I remember correctly. They showed them just an answer, and they asked them if the answer was true, and they showed the experts said that it wasn't true. And then they did the same thing, but they gave the explanation why they arrived to the certain answer. And then the experts said that yes, it's really the real answer, and it's the correct answer, which was false, of course. So how can we protect ourselves from the too convincing algorithm?
So this is another good question. I think this, first of all, the example from Belgium, I heard about it. I'm not familiar with the details, but again, we need to ask the question. In my opinion, again, I'm not talking as an IBM representative or something like that. It's just a subjective opinion. My feeling is that these questions should be asked in a more objective manner, because how many people are out there that were actually going to commit suicide and got help from the AI not to do that? And maybe these people didn't have any access to to psychotherapy or to someone to consult with. We don't know this number. And so I think the question, we should always remember, right, that there are tragedies, but we need to think of that from a wider prism and see, and then try to get to come to conclusions based on that. And regarding to how do we protect ourselves from the AI being too convincing, again, I don't think we can get full protection, but I think there are things that one can do. There is transparency that I mentioned. We need to require transparency from companies, at least to some extent. We need to work on that. And there is also another very important angle, which is education. We need to educate people, how to communicate with these entities, because and again, this has several angles. Okay. First of all, even if you forget about hallucinations and all that, the way you communicate, it's called the prompt engineering, the way you articulate the question to the language model has a lot of impact on the chances of getting a good answer from the language model. And this became like kind of an art by itself, okay? How to phrase the question to the language model. And this is, again, a question of education and maybe tools that we provide to society to teach people from all places of society how to communicate with the language model, first of all, to get good answers in an effective manner. And in addition, how to treat the answers that you get from these entities, and on which places you need to be most careful. Because if you ask it a question about a medical situation, you need to be very cautious with the answers. Maybe you want to educate yourself before you meet the physician to make the meeting with the physician more effective. But probably that's it, right? You don't want to take the advice from this model as is, because it is making mistakes. I can tell you. I was asking it about Project Debater, for example, and it gave me a very good answer. I was asking it, are you familiar with Project Debater and what do you think about that and so on. And the first answer was very good. It told me more or less, again, it was very supportive and very flattering to Project Debater as a milestone in AI and so on. I was very happy to hear that. And then I was asking it how it operates. And the answer was, I would say, 80% correct and 20% were wrong. But if you are not part of the project, it would have been very hard for you to understand that this is wrong. But this was wrong. It was not, there was no question about it. It was simply mixing a follow-up work we did, which I didn't mention today, with the project itself. So it was not even just hallucinating something. It was taking two things and merging them together. And if you read that as a person, you would say, yes, this is how it operates. So to me, again, these are all signs that we need to be careful when we use that. And we need to think very hard about how to educate the wider community of how to use this new technology.
Noam, I know Amnon wants to lock up and have a final word. I'll just say on my end, this was, we're so happy you shared this really, truly inspirational project with us. And, the ripple effects into our field are felt strongly. And I certainly had several aha moments during the talk. So thank you very much. And the risk is we'll call you again. And I'll let Amnon say a final word.
I want to second what Orna just said and thank you both for the paper and your presentation, most illuminating. I want to also share what you said about AI literacy, that we have to educate ourselves. You stressed the question of transparency. Research, empirical research suggests we don't do well. The public itself doesn't do well with transparency because we get lost. It's too much. It's too complicated. There has to be a way of transparency that is not just transparent, but also something approachable.
Mediated.
Something mediated and approachable and that then becomes really murky of that. But I want to conclude with something completely legal. One is now it's up to, now the ball is in our court to say, well, what do we make out of it in terms of actual law? It could be the issue of mediation or arbitration or all kinds of ADRs, and it could be hard law litigation. But also there's an AI Act in the making, which actually says, Noam, that all the companies that now make that kind of stuff, that are generating models for large number of people, should include a risk assessment procedure as part of generating the models and making the services available to the public, in which case they have to assess the possible misuses and possible negative impacts, not with respect to IP and stuff like that, but with respect to what society will look like if this model is unleashed. And that becomes a really interesting follow-up question or debate that we can have in the future, because at least the European regulation agrees with you that the future may be a bright one, but the risk has to be minimized, or the risks have to be minimized, and only the corporations or the entities that generate the generative are in a position to issue an initial risk assessment. So more work for lawyers and risk assessment people in IBM, I guess, which is one way to conclude this one wonderful presentation. I want to thank you. And just one word for the students in the cyber seminar: do contact us about the conference in Jerusalem. If you want to go to the conference in Jerusalem next week, the end of next week, on cyber developments, do let us know so we can arrange for transportation and take care of you manually, not through AI.
Thank you, everybody, for all the deep questions and for all the interest. It was really a very interesting session from my side.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you all the participants, both local and international. We're very happy to have you all with us. All the best and keep checking our events. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye,
Bye.
everybody.
All the
Bye.
best.